Greetings, everyone. Nice to be with you again. Well, this week there are so many great questions, really some profound questions, and I probably won't be able to get to them all in this hour. So I'm thinking of just go ahead and I'm thinking I might go ahead and do another office hours live video tomorrow, Saturday. That's early Sunday for those of you in Australia. Hopefully I get time to do that because really these are such great questions. I'd love to be able to answer them all. Not that I have all the answers necessarily, but they're all worthy of addressing. And I do have some answers. Okay, so let's get started. Richard asks, I'm going to start with a couple shorter questions first. Richard asks, can you kindly provide your preferred translation for the Gayatri Mantra? And he means the Sāvitri Gayatri, Rig Veda 3.62.10, the oldest mantra in continuous usage with a 3,500 year history or more. And this is a Vedic mantra, of course, but eventually in the late period of Tantra, it did get adopted into the tantric path, and there's even a Gayatri Tantra that explains how to do tantric practice with the Vedic Gayatri Mantra. So when that Tantra appeared, the mantra became a tantric mantra as well. And I'm actually not familiar with that text. I learned about it from my friend and colleague Staniswar Timilsina, and he's written about it, and perhaps he can provide more information. Generally, I'm not familiar with late Tantra. That's the post-classical phase of Tantra from 1200 to 1800 of our common era. Anyway, coming to the mantra here. Om Bhur Bhuvaha Swaha Savitur Varēnyam. Sorry, that's a short U, not a long U. Savitur Varēnyam. That's an extra long A sound with 3 matras. Varēnyam. Bhargo Devasya Dhīmahi. Dhiyo Prachodayāt. Now there I'm giving it the Vedic pronunciation, and in the Vedic pronunciation there is a bilabial fricative, which is not a sound we have in English, but it's very, very close to the sound F. It's just that in English we make the sound F with our lower lip and teeth, top teeth, but this is a sound F made with your 2 lips without the teeth. Naf Prachodayāt. That is the only correct pronunciation of this word in Vedic Sanskrit. Now, countless kirtan artists have released recordings of this mantra, and none of them pronounce it correctly, according to, again, the Vedic pronunciation. This is the only correct way. Dhiyo Prachodayāt. Now, also in Vedic pronunciation, and again, the mantra is mostly found in Vedic contexts and only rarely in tantric ones. The Brahmin priests, who are the holders of the Vedic tradition, always put a little sound after the Prachodayāt, which is like Dhiyo Prachodayāt. There's very slight variations in tone that you'll hear. So some people go Prachodayāt, but everyone that is pronouncing it in a Vedic context puts this sound after Prachodayāt, even though that's not actually part of the word. It has thousands of years of transmission in that form. So, in this tradition, we follow the oral transmission above and beyond the textual one. When it's still alive, we always follow the oral transmission. So it's actually, from that perspective, not correct to not add the at the end of Prachodayāt. And we hear the exact same thing often in specifically tantric Gayatris like Ganesh Gayatri, Vakratundaya Dhīmahi no, sorry, I said it wrong. Ganesh Gayatri, no, it's escaped my mind, though I've done it thousands of times. Om Ekadantaya Vidmahe, that's it. Vakratundaya Dhīmahi, Tanno Danti Prachodayāt. So you had to sing it to remember it, right? So that you hear at the end as well. It's in a tantric context, it's not necessarily required, but we very frequently find it. So basically, this is another reason you need to get mantras from living teachers, because these little details are not transmitted textually. Okay. So with the Sāvitri Gayatri, so named because the deity of this Sāvitri Gayatri, the one that goes Om Bhur Bhuvaha Swaha Savitur Varēnyam, is Savitur. And Savitur is a deity no longer really worshipped in India other than with this mantra. And Sāvitri is the deity of the rising and setting sun, but especially the rising sun. So the sun was so important, especially in ancient times in India, as a deity, that it had many different forms, that you worship or venerate the sun under different names according to different phases. So for example, the sun has a different name in each of the 12 astrological houses, I guess they're called. And that's reflected in the 12 solar mantras that you find sometimes associated with Surya Namaskar. Anyway, it, this worship or veneration of the sun was sort of denigrated by Western monotheists, Christian colonialists, and others, but it really makes a lot of sense considering all life on Earth exists because of the sun. You exist because of the sun. And indeed, you have carbon atoms forged in the heart of a star, not the sun, but an earlier star, in your body. So you exist not only because of the sun, but because of other stars that previously existed, which is kind of fascinating, because as far as we know, it's not possible to have biological life without carbon atoms. So all life depends on stars, and we depend specifically on our sun, of course. So venerating the sun as a manifestation of the divine makes perfect sense. Probably don't need to justify it to you, but I thought I'd mention that. Oh gosh, this is supposed to be a short question and answer. Anyway, my translation, which I'll post, is literal, and most translations you get of this mantra are not literal, so it's nice to have a literal one. Om, which means basically yes. It's a syllable of affirmation. Bhur, Bhuvaha, Swaha, earth, atmosphere, heaven. And in some versions of the Gayatri, you actually get 7 words here, not 3, naming higher sort of dimensions of reality, which I won't get into right now, otherwise this will be too long. But it says in the most common version, earth, atmosphere, heaven, meaning space beyond the atmosphere where the heavenly bodies are, not meaning anything like Christian heaven here, meaning the heavens, okay, Swaha, which is, by the way, a totally distinct word from Swaha, the word of offering. This is Swaha with short vowels, and it means the heavens. Okay, the rest of the mantra. Tat Savitur Varēnyam, Bhargo Devasya Dhīmahi, Dhiyo yo nah Prachodayāt. So you pronounce it that way when you're speaking. When you're singing, you add that little sound at the end. Prachodayāt, Prachodayāt. There we go. Means, may we focus our awareness, Dhīmahi, may we focus our awareness on the alluring radiance of the rising sun. I actually left a word or two out in this translation. I was trying to keep it short, I guess. I did it a while ago. Because may we focus our awareness on that divinity, Devasya, which is the alluring radiance, Bhargo, of the rising sun, Savitur. And Varēnyam means like the best of deities, something like that. And Savitur, which I hear translated as the rising sun, literally means the vivifier or the rejuvenator. Okay, that's the literal meaning of Savitur. So may we focus our awareness on that divinity, the alluring radiance of the rising sun, the vivifier, best of divinities, depending on how you take Varēnyam. Dhiyo naf Prachodayāt, may it inspire our thoughts and meditations, taking the word Dhiyo in two meanings there. May it inspire our thoughts, but our contemplative thoughts, our meditative thoughts. May it inspire and impel. Prachodayāt means to impel in the octative case, or inspire. Okay, so that's the translation. And I could say more about this mantra, but I'll stop there so I have time to get to other things. Okay. And in the live feed, somebody mentions that there's a Taoist practice that involves ingesting the light of the sun. Yes, there's a tantric practice where you do that too. You actually look at the sun, preferably, when it's rising or setting, so you don't burn your retina, and you inhale the solar energy into the body, and you can direct it to a particular center or chakra to enliven it or activate it. And there's even a practice where you work with 21 chakras, a 21 chakra system. Remember, there's many, many chakra systems. And in this practice, you work with a 21 chakra system and you activate each of the 21 by inhaling solar energy to that point and doing a mantra for that particular chakra. So it's actually those 7 words that start Bhur, Bhuvaha, Swaha. Okay. Mahaha, Janaha, Tapaha, Satyam, those are the 7, times 3 equals 21 in this chakra system. Okay, so moving on. Oh gosh, so many questions. Okay, where are we going to go next? Okay, someone asks, I think it was Murad. Murad, sorry if I mispronounce your name. Says, I always wondered if, for example, there are 2 traditions that spend an enormous amount of practice, effort, and time for spiritual exploration. How come one tradition discovers or gets further than the other? For example, Saiva tradition has 36 tattvas, but Sankhya and Patanjalian yoga has only 25 or 26 if you add Isvara. Now, this is a very important topic that actually much occupied some of our ancient authors to explain why some traditions get further than others. And of course, in reality, the explanation is historically very complex because it has to do with different ramifications or branches of these different traditions developing along different lines, drawing on different source materials, but also overlapping. It also has to do with, of course, the nature of the realization of the realized beings of different lineages, which is not all the same. And so to kind of account for, these differences in realization and levels of realization, if you must put it that way, traditions came up with, different maps of tattvas and different articulations of the nature of enlightenment or awakening and liberation. And so the tantric tradition argued in detail that Patanjali and Sankhya, they were right as far as they went, but they didn't go far enough, that they arrived at a certain place, whether it's Purusha or Ishvara. Those are really the same, actually, though, because Purusha is considered, identical to Ishvara. People arrived at a certain place and said, that's it, I'm done. And they didn't suspect that there was further to go because their tradition didn't teach that there was further to go, but there is always further to go, theoretically, perhaps infinitely. And that's part of what, how Tantra explains, we have these tattvas that go beyond that. And if only, those guys hadn't stopped where they did, they would have discovered the same thing. And that's why not that it's a thing, but that's why in Tantra, this all-important principle of tarka, where tarka is actually one of the limbs of yoga or aids to yoga in the tantric system, and where it's not considered a limb to yoga in Patanjali, even though, of course, it's very, very important. Tarka means viveka, discernment. But in Tantra, they prefer the word tarka, and they say, look, the most important tarka is to know when you're not done. Otherwise, you get stuck at that level. You must know that they're as Walt Whitman said, even if you attain the levels of the heavenly orbs, you lift and proceed beyond. So this is a deeper topic than I can go into now. But it has to do in part with the cultivation of humility. You realize, oh, wow, this level, or whatever you want to call it, the stage that I've realized is not all there is to it, or not necessarily. Okay, so for more on this, since I don't have time to answer it in full, for more on this, please read Chapter 8 of the Recognition Sutras, which explores this topic in detail. And that's a very important locus for this discussion, and it's discussed elsewhere as well, like in Tantra Loka, which is not translated adequately. So I can't recommend that yet. Okay, so in the live feed, Gyaneshwari asks, do we have free will? Now, this is, of course, a huge and deep and complex topic. It's really not, but the mind makes it complex with all the questions and doubts it throws up about the topic. But there is also a quick answer, a short answer. The vast majority of people don't have free will. They think they do because the brain generates what neurologists call, some of them call, a cognitive illusion, whereby you have the feeling, I chose A, but I could have chosen B. But this feeling is an illusion, right? You can only ever choose what seems to be the best option available to you given the information you have at that time. Not only information, but whatever else you're dealing with, the internal obstacles, blah, blah, blah. You can only choose what seems to be the best option available to you, given what you know and what you're carrying at that moment. And you'll only ever do that. You're helpless to do otherwise. And so, in general, people don't have free will, at least not the way most people understand that phrase. But choice is still real. You still have to make the choice. But if we had all the data, if we knew exactly what information you're working with and all your psychological proclivities were analyzed to the nth degree, we could perfectly predict what choice you would make in every case. So, but the choice still has to be made. You still have to go through the process of making the choice, even though ultimately, you're only going to choose, again, what seems like the best option available to you, given your conditioning and given the information available to you. Now, there's an exception, though, to this general rule that free will is an illusion. And that's when we engage the meta principle of consciousness called vimarsha, which is sort of cultivating non-conceptual, wordless, self-reflective awareness. So self-reflective awareness, not in the sense of kind of thinking about yourself, self-referencing, criticizing yourself, but it's a wordless self-reflective awareness. So immersing in that vimarsha shakti, that self-reflective, that power of self-reflective awareness, creates a new context in which there is wiggle room, I call it. And in this wiggle room, inspiration can come to you and through you that is somehow transcends your conditioning. How could that be possible? Who knows? but there is something other than conditioning in consciousness. I mean, when I say who knows, I mean we can't explain it precisely neurologically or scientifically, but somehow inspiration can arise from a deeper level than your subconscious conditioning, but only when you make the space for it. And that's why a meditator, a contemplator, and one who knows how to pause and immerse in consciousness itself, right? In the self-reflective awareness, where self doesn't mean anything like ego or personality or any of those meanings. And it can be indeed all-inclusive, but this reflective awareness, I could just call it, immersing in it creates this context, gives this wider scope of possibilities, creates this wiggle room so that something else could arise that otherwise wouldn't, some inspiration or idea or impulse. And then you now have more choices than you would have had otherwise. Now, of course, still, you're going to still choose whatever seems like the best option available to you. And sometimes our conditioning is so strong that even when an inspiration arises, we still choose what our conditioning says to do because it feels more comfortable and familiar. And out of fear, we don't go with the intuitive sense, even though time and again we're shown that this deeper inspiration of intuition knows more than our conditioned mind or subconscious mind. And this intuitive sense knows more, not that it's a mind, right? But it knows more, figuratively speaking, because it is already and always connected to the whole pattern of reality. So it has access to a scope of data, you might call it, that the mind does not. But it doesn't process, the intuition doesn't process data, right? Because it has access to the pattern, to the deeper pattern, but in a non-conceptual way, which is hard to say in English. It somehow has access to data in a non-data sort of way. Anyway, this is, again, a big topic, and I'll have to cut it off there. I do have a blog post about it, which is going to be improved a little bit and rewritten, but it is still very, very good as it stands, I think. It just needs a little more nuance that discusses this exact principle. So, basically, the short answer then is that most people are just acting out their programming, acting out their conditioning 24/7. But once the awakening process starts, you have this capacity developed through meditation and contemplation of the non-conceptual variety, orienting to your consciousness, your being, your presence, your awareness, that creates, a wider scope and creates a sense. Over time, it also gives you the power to choose free from the sort of gravitational pull of your conditioning or habit pattern. So that's another reason to cultivate that. Okay. Nicole Mader asks about daily practice, daily ritual. I can right now. I'll just address that by saying the best thing to do is to take the Foundations course, which gives you a fair amount of guidance in developing a daily practice and structuring and sequencing it, including some key principles for sequencing different practices within your daily sit. So I recommend that. Oh, and then replying to Nicole, Nora gives a link to a sequence of practice that's in the Facebook group. This has now been sort of more or less superseded by the Foundations course, but also not, because it contain some practices that the Foundations course doesn't. So yeah, look at both. Okay. Somebody, I forgot to note down names when I copied these questions. I think this was Radha Madhav who asked this. Anyway, he says, I love your courses. Thanks a lot. Please explain if Parameśvara is embodied, and if yes, then how? I'm interested in the concept of the absolute in non-dual Shaiva Tantra. It goes by several names, but Parameśvara is one name for the absolute. Since Tantrikas emphasize embodiment, I guess in their view, the absolute is embodied. What about its gender? I'm interested in archetype gender. Okay, so yes, Tantrikas emphasize embodiment, at least Kaula Tantrikas do, which is, what I teach, and it's pretty much what's out there is a form of Tantra based in Kaulism, whether you know that word or not. Yes, the absolute is embodied as everything. So the entire universe, Vishwa, all manifest phenomena. So not only the physical universe, but all manifest phenomena are referred to by Vishwa. That is the body of the absolute. The absolute embodies as the whole, the totality, not just at any one moment in time, but at all moments in time. So the universe throughout its entire lifespan is the embodiment of the absolute. The absolute, of course, transcends time, so it makes sense that it embodies as the universe in all time and space, up until the final heat death of this universe, which is many trillions of years away, or maybe quadrillions of years away. So the universe is actually still fairly young compared to what science can tell us, which it can tell us quite a lot about its probable lifespan. And all of that, again, is the embodiment of the absolute Parameśvara. Now, Parameśvara means Shiva and Shakti in perfect fusion. That's one way of defining the term. So it's referred to as tattva number 0 or tattva number 37, depending on how you're looking at it. But it's not a tattva like the other tattvas, the other 36 tattvas, because it doesn't top a hierarchy, but rather pervades the whole and yet transcends the whole, which is to say that even the entirety of the manifest universe throughout its entire lifespan of quadrillions of years doesn't exhaust the absolute potential. And perhaps we're best calling the absolute potential, because the word absolute by itself is kind of meaningless. So the field of absolute potential births this universe, and it has birthed countless universes before this one, and countless universes will be birthed after this one. Or perhaps it doesn't make sense to say before and after. Perhaps it makes sense, because this transcends time, that they're all somehow simultaneously coexisting. But by other universes, we mean realities that we in this universe will never have access to, no matter what. Okay? So all these universes, and this is what some people call the multiverse, all these universes are birthed out of this field of absolute potential, and even then, they don't quite exhaust that potential unless there are infinite universes. If there are infinite universes with infinite time and space to play with, then that will and does express the absolute potential completely, because with infinite time and space to play with, everything that could ever happen will happen. And when I say could ever happen, I mean even with laws of physics other than those exhibited in this universe, because other universes will have different laws of physics. And so absolutely everything beyond your imagination happens in infinite time and space, but we don't know for sure, at least scientifically, we don't know whether reality actually is infinite or just unimaginably vast without being infinite. We don't even know if our universe is infinite, by the way. People generally tend to think that it is, but many scientists physicists talk about the possibility of a finite universe that's unbounded, meaning there's no outer boundary. If you traveled, in one direction for, an unimaginably vast amount of time, you would never hit a boundary, but you would end up eventually back where you started if the universe is finite, but boundaryless. And it seems that's very much possible. But anyway, it's so vast that even if it's not infinite, it is to all intents and purposes, except for this one detail, that in an infinite universe, everything will happen, which is a horrifying detail, actually, because it means every imaginable hell, as well as every imaginable heaven, will exist. And the first part of that equation seems somewhat horrifying. But again, we don't actually know for sure. And the scriptures tend towards the opinion that the